Welcome to Economics Trainer. This video was made to help you strengthen your skills in microeconomics. Here we have a sample question, care of brighttutoring.ca. It's the kind of question you'd expect to see on a test in a first-year microeconomics class. Let's work through it together. So here's the question. Consider a competitive market with a supply curve of market price equals 40 plus 0.1 times quantity supplied, and a demand curve of market price P equals 140 minus 0.4 times quantity demanded. With that information, what we have to figure out are what are the elasticities of supply and demand at the competitive equilibrium. And then using that information, we'll have to figure out who, between the consumer and the producer, would pay the greater burden of a tax. So let's start off by finding the competitive equilibrium and then go from there. So here we have our supply and demand curves. So to find the equilibrium, we do supply equals demand. Let's figure out the algebra here. So we have 40 plus 0.1 Q for supply. And then for demand, we have 140 minus 0.4 Q. So let's solve for Q here by putting everything on the left. We have 0.5 Q. And then if we move that 40 to the other side, we get 100. So multiplying both sides by 2, we get a market quantity in our competitive equilibrium of 200 units. And then to find the market price, we just take this and we can plug it into either supply or demand. It doesn't matter at the equilibrium, so let's just plug it into supply. Let's see, we get P is 40 plus 0.1 times the quantity. So let's see, we get 40 plus 10% of 20 of 200, so that's going to be 20. So let's see here. So we have a market price P star, 40 plus 20, that's going to be 60. So there's our competitive equilibrium, and now we can use that to figure out our elasticity. So if we go to our standard elasticity equation, we say, okay, our elasticity is the change in quantity divided by quantity, and then divided by the type, which is own price, so we have the change in price divided by the price, and then we flip that up, we get the standard elasticity equation, which is change in quantity over change in price, and then all of that times the price over the quantity. So the great part here is we've done half this work already. Here's our competitive equilibrium right here, so we can just plug that into the end. And then for the change in quantity from the change in price, that's what we got to figure out up here from our supply and demand curves. So up here, let's see, for our supply curve, we have it in the inverted form. So we can easily figure out the change in price from the change in quantity supplied. That's simply the derivative, or the slope. You can see it's the 0.1. So if we flip that around, we say, okay, well, if the change in quantity supplied from the change in price, we can just flip it. So instead of being 1 over 10, being 10%, now it's going to be 10 over 1, which is 10. And we can do the same thing here for the demand curve. Let's see here. So we have the change in price over the change in quantity demanded. That'll be our slope. So we have negative 0.4. And then we go here, we flip it around. We say, okay, the change in quantity demanded over the change in price That's going to be negative 10 over 4 instead of 4 over 10. That's going to be negative 2.5. So now that we have that work, we can combine everything together here and figure out our elasticity for each curve. So for supply, we just follow the equation here. So change in quantity supplied from the change in price, it's going to be up here. That's the 10. And then for the back, we have P star Q star. So that's going to be 60 over 200. So let's see here for supply. We'll have 600 on the top, 200 on the bottom. That's going to be 3. So the supply elasticity is always positive. So we compare it to 1. We can see, okay, that's greater than 1. So they're going to be elastic. Let's do the same thing for the demand curve. So we say, okay, the elasticity of demand follows the same equation here. We just have to plug in the demand number. So we have negative 2.5 in the front. And the back will be the competitive equilibrium. So let's figure this out here. So we have 2.5 times 60 divided by 200. So we get negative 0.75. So if we take the absolute value of that, we get 0.75. And then we compare that to 1, and we say, okay, that's less than 1. So the demand curve here has to be inelastic. Let's go back to the question here. So for the first part, our supply elasticity, that's going to be 3. And then our demand elasticity is going to be 0.75. So we have those calculated. And then for the next part, using these numbers, we have to figure out who would pay the greater burden of a tax. So the key intuition here is to know whoever is more inelastic is going to pay more of the burden. So in terms of our supply and demand, we can see, well, if demand was inelastic, supply was elastic, so it's going to be the consumer who pays it. And that's how you solve that question. Thanks for watching. You can find more microeconomics questions like this one by subscribing to this channel or by going to brighttutoring.ca. See you next time.